him in publicly because behind closed doors diplomacy has the best chance to avert an incursion. They did send some sort of confidential proposal to Putin that they hope he takes seriously. What could that possibly be? What would they propose that Putin would take seriously from this administration? To help us with that, we're pleased to be joined by Dana Lewis, award-winning international journalist who served as a Moscow-based correspondent for 12 years at NBC and Fox News and currently hosts the Backstory podcast. Dana, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan and Amy. Good morning.
Good morning. So the confidential proposal, any intuition on that?
Well, I don't think you have to be a magician to know what's in there. First of all, very clearly, the U.S. is saying, and NATO collectively are saying, you will not tell us, Russia, who we allow to be members in the, what appears to be the ever-expanding NATO. And then there's a lot of talk in there about de-escalation. If Putin is really concerned about European security arrangements, then let's talk about, short-range, intermediate nuclear missiles in Europe. The INF was abandoned by the Trump administration after Russia apparently violated it. Maybe more discussions on the START treaties, the strategic treaties on nuclear arms, and then maybe some discussions about troop movements, whether they be in the Baltics by NATO allies or whether they be Russian forces that are now moving very threateningly on the Ukraine border and then into places like Belarus. So I think there's a whole array of de-escalation. And look, one of the things I know you kind of said it with a bit of sarcasm there at keeping the offer from America secret. But one of the things by doing that, I think, is clever because it allows Putin to say that they won concessions and maybe gives him room to step down if he really wants to.
Well, what would the concessions be if what you said is what's contained in broad strokes in that confidential proposal? Why wouldn't Putin just file that in the circular file immediately?
Well, I think he will file it in the circular file because he's not serious about de-escalation. But if he would like to say that he won something, it's renewed talks on missile deployments in Europe. It's renewed talks on NATO deployments and rotating battle group movements, which you have from NATO through the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So, I mean, he can say that he won something and he pulled NATO forces in a way back from Russia's border.
Well, what's Putin's endgame here?
Great question.
Well, what do you think it is, though?
I think he's playing to a domestic audience. I think he has a lot of trouble. He's got economic problems. He is not popular politically. He is looking for a new term yet again in 2024. He's laying the groundwork. And the best way that Putin reaps sometimes popularity is to talk about outside threats and that he's the great defender of Russia. At the same time, they are losing in Ukraine. They have beaten up the Ukrainians for 8 years. They have killed them. There are 14,000 people who have died there. Increasingly, by trying to strangle Ukraine economically and threaten them militarily, they have pushed Ukraine. They haven't pulled Ukraine towards the Kremlin. They have pushed Ukraine towards NATO. That is speeding up along with European integration in the economy. He is losing ground and he is scared absolutely of democracy on his border.
Well, you seem to suggest that Putin is playing a weak hand here. That's not how it feels, number one. Number two, everything that we've seen from Putin over the last 30 years, and we understand of his sort of philosophy, and we've heard this from presidents as well, both parties, is that, he wants to restore some semblance of Mother Russia to the Soviet era, to the great Mother Russia that dominated Asia and Europe. And so this is all part of revanchism, Crimea, Ukraine, potentially the Baltics from there. Isn't that what his mind's eye is? This is the time potentially to strike and do what he's always wanted to do, which is to extend Russian influence in the region?
I don't think it's the time to strike because, to a large degree, he will not be successful. He may be successful in pushing into some of those rebel areas. And this is not my imagination when I answer your questions. I just got off the phone with former Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, who is the former Prime Minister who served under Putin from 2000 to 2004. He thinks that Putin is playing a weak hand. He thinks that Putin is desperate internally and that he is pushing externally. And yes, no doubt, he does dream about imperialistic Russia. But, fat chance.
Well, what about the prospect of not, giving the green light to those 125,000 troops on the eastern border of Ukraine, but trying to, foment a coup in Kyiv and install a puppet there?
That's what he's done for years. I mean, I spent my career covering the Orange Revolution and then the Maidan Revolution. He is the one that put President Yanukovych in power. And then when Yanukovych turned away, this is the Ukrainian president who fled to Russia after the Maidan Revolution. When Yanukovych turned away from his own people demanding integration in the European Union and down the road NATO membership, then there was a bloody coup, in Maidan, and many Ukrainians died. So,
but I mean, why? I mean, are you just suggesting the Zelensky regime is strong enough to withstand any sort of similar attempt?
Well, I think that Ukrainians will withstand any attempt. I think that the current administration is pretty wobbly in Ukraine.
And so. I mean, Putin, it doesn't seem to me, would want this situation as it currently is to be in stasis. He's got to make some sort of move. So I guess one thing is he could, as you say, that this confidential proposal, I could accept some terms of it, I could characterize it how I want and declare victory. But it seems to me that's not strong enough if you suggest he's as weak as he is domestically.
Well, I think he's trying to destabilize Ukraine constantly, and that's what he's done over the last 8 years. And I think that the U.S. I also talked to John Bolton yesterday, the former national security advisor, former American ambassador to the UN, and John says that unfortunately Putin still has the initiative. That he doesn't feel that the Biden administration has been tough enough, and promising sanctions later on is not going to be enough. And he says the U.S. should be placing troops in Ukraine right now. U.S. troops, so that when, according to, to quote John word for word, he says, when Russian commanders look through their binoculars, they see American flags there, and they will have to think twice about moving forward. No doubt, I think, that he will move forward. I think Putin will do something. I don't think he's going to look for an entire takeover of Ukraine, but he will do something in those rebel-held areas. And will he openly invade with Russian troops? That's going to bring sanctions and crushing sanctions. I don't know what he's going to do. He may just step up and say, we're going to start supplying arms to the rebels because America and Britain and the NATO allies have been doing the same. So we're going to try to balance out the situation.
Where do you think those 8,500 U.S. troops who are on standby right now, where are they going to be deployed to?
Not Ukraine. They would go to the Baltics. By the way, my sources tell me they would be the 82nd Airborne, because they're the rapid reaction force that's officially on standby in the U.S. for anything that happens in the world right now. But they would go into Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, and they would beef up what are rotating battle groups right now, by the way, because they are NATO forces, but they constantly rotate because under the Russia-America NATO agreement, friendship accord, as some people refer to it as that, there are not supposed to be bases on Russia's border. So in fact, the U.S., while it has helped with NATO expansion, it has not placed bases on Russia's borders. That could change. I mean, Putin is pushing us into a whole new area here.
So if Putin is as weak domestically as you suggest, we were speaking with Katie McFarland on yesterday's program, former deputy NSA for Trump. And she said one of the things that America could do and should do is to move towards energy independent policies rather than strengthening Putin's hand by reducing energy independence at home and necessarily increasing energy dependence from OPEC countries and Russia. And, and that's not a light switch. That may take some time in terms of Putin feeling the effects, but signaling that you were going to do that would perhaps be more of a hamper or more destabilizing for Putin if he is so weak than some of these personal sanctions that Biden has suggested.
Well, I mean, the Biden administration is also talking about guaranteeing Europe energy, and they are now talking to Saudi Arabia and others, so that if Putin turns off the tap, places like Germany will stand together. And Blinken said yesterday, there's no daylight in between NATO allies. I take your point. I think there is daylight there, and there are problems. But Bolton says enough with Nord Stream 2.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't wait till Putin invades. Make a commitment now that you're not going to turn the tap on. You're not going to agree to gas imports from Russia, because he is already in Moldova. He is already supporting rebel troops in Ukraine. He is already in Belarus. And he's got to pull back. And the only way to do that now is to have energy independence.
Is there any prospect that he could face some sort of internal coup within Putin ranks if this show of force on the Ukrainian border doesn't turn out well for him?
I don't think he can face a coup. I think he's still very strong. But my sources tell me Putin has become much more isolated in the last 2 years. He used to hold like 25, 30 meetings a day. He's sitting out at his dacha, largely holding video screen meetings, meeting with 4 or 5 people. You've seen a strengthening of the power ministries, the KGB, the former KGB, which is the FSB now, the army, the internal police. They are much more prominent in his inner circle. So yeah, there are dangers from Putin, because ultimately this is a kleptocracy with billions of dollars stolen put in foreign bank accounts. If you take those sanctions on Russian banks, and I talked to a former U.S. Treasury official who used to do these sanctions even after 2014. He said, if you actually take U.S. sanctions on Russian banks, the economy will be strangled. Those banks cannot operate. They cannot carry out transactions with U.S. currency. I mean, they are done. It's a death sentence. And if Putin takes that step and the economy, never mind just for average Russians, because I don't think he really cares about them, but his inner circle, those oligarchs, and 400 oligarchs would appear on that list of sanctions. If you take sanctions against those people, I mean, they can get angry and pretty quick, and they can turn on him. Now, would he do it? I don't think he's going to do it. I don't think he's going to roll that dice.
He is Dana Lewis, award-winning international journalist who served as a Moscow-based correspondent for 12 years at NBC and Fox, currently host of the Backstory podcast. Dana, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
The toys may be frozen, but the competition sure isn't. Those stories next.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or if, like a lot of people, you just have a plan you're not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare. It's a Christian healthcare sharing program. There are more than 400,000 members now, and they love it. In fact, MediShare has double the customer satisfaction rate compared to that of health insurance. And